While my husband was on a business trip, I cleaned the house and found a strange jar hidden behind the drywall. But the moment I opened it and saw what was inside, I froze because I finally understood what he had been hiding from me. My name is Vanessa, and I am 33 years old. I always thought my biggest problem was being the boring family outcast. I had no idea my husband and my family were plotting to literally erase me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Connor was supposed to be in Chicago closing a massive investment banking deal. We had been married for 4 years, and he always played the part of the perfect loving husband. I decided to spend my Saturday patching up some water damage in the basement of our home in the Boston suburbs. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on investigating corporate fraud, tracing hidden assets, and finding money that people try to conceal. I am trained to look for things that do not belong. The basement smelled of damp earth and old wood. When I pulled back a rotting piece of drywall near the water heater, I noticed a hollow space in the insulation. It was far too deliberate to be a structural flaw. Inside sat a heavy glass mason jar sealed tight with thick gray tape. My heart started to race as I peeled the tape back and pried the metal lid open. Inside was a cheap prepaid cell phone, a silver USB drive, and a folded legal document. I pulled the document out and smoothed it over my dusty knees. It was a quitclaim deed. I stared at the pages in absolute disbelief, my breathing growing shallow. The document detailed the transfer of my house, a property valued at over $1 million, to a limited liability company I had never heard of. My signature was at the very bottom, perfectly forged in blue ink. Before the panic could even settle in my chest, I heard the front door unlock upstairs. Heavy footsteps echoed above me, followed by loud voices and familiar laughter. I shoved the phone and the USB drive into my pocket and walked up the stairs holding the forged deed in my hand. Standing in my grand foyer was my mother, Patricia, my younger sister, Rachel, her husband, Jamal, and a stranger holding a clipboard. Jamal is an African-American luxury real estate broker who always wears custom suits he cannot actually afford. He is flashy, arrogant, and constantly drowning in debt. He was pointing toward my beautiful curved staircase, completely ignoring the fact that he had just walked into my home uninvited. "Measure the primary suite for my new home office," Jamal told the man with the clipboard. "I want custom mahogany shelving built into the walls, and we will need to tear out that outdated carpet Vanessa put in." I stepped into the hallway, gripping the papers tightly. "What are you doing in my house?" I asked. My mother, Patricia, turned to me. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms tightly across her chest. "Gather your things and start packing, Vanessa," she said coldly. "Connor generously sold this house to Jamal for a massive discount to keep it in the family. He wanted to help your sister out since you clearly do not care about her well-being." I stood there looking at the people who were supposed to be my family. "You cannot sell a house without the owner," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "This house was bought with my money, long before I even met Connor. My name is the only one on the original deed." Patricia stepped closer, her face twisted with that familiar disgust she had directed at me my entire life. "Do not look at me like that, Vanessa," she snapped. "You are 33 years old, barren, and married to a calculator. Jamal and Rachel are expecting their second child. They need the space more than you do. You cannot even give your husband a baby, so what do you need a 5-bedroom house for?" Rachel flipped her hair and adjusted her designer bag on her shoulder. She was the golden child, the one who never had to work for anything, while I was labeled the boring workaholic. "Connor knows Jamal has been having a tough quarter with his brokerage," she said. "It is called family loyalty, Vanessa. You should try it sometime instead of burying your head in spreadsheets and auditing reports. You are so boring and selfish. Jamal deserves an office with a view to entertain his high-end clients." I did not cry. Years of being the family scapegoat had taught me to lock my emotions away. I remembered how Patricia used to drain my savings to buy Rachel expensive pageant dresses while I wore hand-me-downs. I remembered working 3 jobs to pay for my accounting degree while Jamal and Rachel took luxury vacations funded by my mother. I was certainly not going to let them take my home. My mind shifted entirely into forensic accounting mode, analyzing the threat in front of me. I looked at Jamal, who was grinning smugly beside my sister. To sell this house, you need my signature, I said. And if you think I'm going to sign my property over to feed your massive ego and your failing brokerage, you are completely delusional. I want all of you out of my house right now. Rachel laughed, a high-pitched mocking sound that echoed in the foyer. It is too late for that, sister, she sneered. The house was mortgaged yesterday. Your signature is already on the paperwork. Connor took care of everything before he left for Chicago. You do not own this place anymore, so you are the one who needs to get out. My blood ran cold. The forged quitclaim deed in my hand suddenly made terrifying sense. They had actually done it. They had stolen my house right out from under me while I was sitting in my own living room. The appraiser looked extremely uncomfortable and slowly stepped toward the front door, trying to make a quiet exit. Just then, the cheap prepaid phone I had shoved into my pocket buzzed aggressively against my leg. I pulled it out, keeping my face completely blank so they would not see my alarm. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize, but the message was clearly meant for Jamal. I opened the message and read the words on the glowing screen. It said, "Is the bitch out of the house yet? Make sure she is gone. The $5 million life insurance policy kicks in at midnight." I slipped the burner phone back into my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady. I turned my attention to the appraiser standing awkwardly near the mahogany staircase. I pointed directly at the heavy oak front door. "You are trespassing on private property," I told him, my voice echoing slightly in the large foyer. "If you take one step onto my staircase, I will have you arrested for breaking and entering." The appraiser paled and immediately dropped his tape measure. He muttered a quick apology and practically sprinted out the front door, leaving my so-called family standing in stunned silence. Jamal stepped forward. He closed the distance between us until he was towering over me. He smelled of expensive cologne and misplaced arrogance. He jabbed a finger toward my face. "You think you are so smart, Vanessa. You think a boring bean counter can stop a legal real estate transfer. Connor already signed the papers. This house belongs to my LLC now. You are just a squatter." I did not back away. I looked at the custom stitching on his suit lapel and then right into his eyes. 18 U.S. Code Section 1344, I stated calmly. It is the Federal Penal Code for mortgage and bank fraud. A forged quitclaim deed carries a penalty of up to 30 years in federal prison and a $1 million fine. And since you used a shell company across state lines to execute the transfer, we can add wire fraud to the charges. Do you really want to play this game with a forensic accountant, Jamal? His smug smile faltered. For a split second, the absolute certainty in his eyes shattered. He looked back at Rachel, who was suddenly busy adjusting her designer handbag. Patricia stepped between us, her face flushed with fury. "You are ruining this family again, Vanessa," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You have always been a jealous, bitter girl. We try to help Rachel and Jamal build a life for their baby, and you throw legal threats in our faces. You deserve to end up completely alone." "Get out of my house," I said, refusing to raise my voice. "I will not say it again." Jamal grabbed Rachel by the arm and pulled her toward the door. "We will let Connor handle this psycho," he muttered. They stormed out onto the driveway. I watched through the sidelight windows as Jamal opened the door of a brand-new Porsche Panamera. He revved the engine aggressively before speeding off down the quiet suburban street, with Patricia following closely in her own car. The moment their tail lights vanished around the corner, I slammed the deadbolt shut. I engaged the security chain and armed the alarm system. The house fell completely silent, but the roar inside my head was deafening. $5 million. A life insurance policy kicking in at midnight. Connor was not just leaving me, he was planning to erase me. I ran up the stairs to my home office, locking the door behind me. I booted up my encrypted work laptop. As a senior fraud investigator, I had access to enterprise-grade decryption software. I pulled the silver USB drive from my pocket and plugged it into the secure port. The drive was password-protected with military-grade encryption. Connor always thought he was the smartest person in the room, but he was fundamentally lazy. I ran a quick bypass script using the birth date of his favorite investment idol and the name of his childhood dog. The progress bar flashed green. access granted. Dozens of nested folders appeared on my screen. I clicked on the master ledger, and a massive spreadsheet loaded. My eyes scanned the rows of data, rapidly processing the flow of numbers. It was not just a record of our personal finances. It was a highly sophisticated money laundering operation. Connor was moving millions of dollars through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and the Seychelles, but he was not acting alone. Every major offshore transfer corresponded perfectly with a domestic real estate transaction handled by Jamal's luxury brokerage firm. Jamal would sell an overpriced property to an anonymous LLC, and Connor would clean the dirty money through his investment bank, disguising it as foreign capital gains. They were a two-man washing machine for a dangerous criminal syndicate. My stomach churned as I realized the scale of the operation. They were playing with cartel money, and based on the red negative figures at the bottom of the ledger, they were currently short by exactly $5 million. The syndicate was bleeding them dry, and Connor needed a massive influx of cash immediately to save his own life. I opened the final folder labeled Insurance. A PDF document loaded on the screen. It was a comprehensive life insurance policy bound to my name. The payout was exactly $5 million, and Connor was the sole beneficiary. I scrolled frantically through the policy details. Securing a policy of this magnitude required more than just an online application. It required a rigorous physical examination, blood work, and a biometric verification. I checked the dates on the medical clearance forms. The physical examination took place 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday at a private clinic downtown. My blood ran completely cold. I was not even in the state 2 weeks ago. I was in Dallas presenting a fraud prevention seminar to a board of directors. There was absolutely no way I could have taken that medical exam. I scrolled down to the final page of the PDF. The insurance company required a digital photograph of the examinee holding their state-issued identification card to prevent identity theft. I clicked on the attached image file. The photo filled my laptop screen. The woman in the picture was wearing my favorite beige trench coat. Her hair was styled exactly like mine, and she was holding up my stolen driver's license. But the face staring back at me did not belong to me. The woman who took the medical exam pretending to be me, the woman actively helping my husband secure a $5 million bounty on my head, was my own sister Rachel. The woman holding my stolen driver's license was my own sister Rachel. She had looked right into a clinical camera and signed my death warrant just to get a cut of a $5 million payout. My own flesh and blood had sold my life for a designer handbag and a luxury vacation. The sheer scale of the betrayal burned in my chest, but I absolutely refused to let it consume me. Panic is a luxury for the unprepared, and I am a professional auditor. I deal in cold, hard facts, and right now the math was undeniable. Connor and my family were planning to eliminate me before midnight. I pushed my chair back from the desk and grabbed my primary cell phone. I bypassed the standard customer service lines and dialed a direct unlisted number for the Elite Fraud Division at Vanguard National Bank. This was the highly encrypted line I used when collaborating with federal agencies on corporate asset seizures. A familiar voice answered on the second ring. It was Marcus, the Senior Director of Fraud Prevention. I had personally helped Marcus untangle a massive corporate embezzlement case 2 years ago, saving his institution millions. I did not waste time with polite small talk. I told him exactly what was happening. I explained that my husband had forged a quitclaim deed to transfer my primary residence to an LLC operated by my brother-in-law. I read off the specific tax identification number for Jamal's shell company directly from the encrypted USB drive. Marcus typed rapidly on his end, his keyboard clacking through the phone speaker. The tone of his voice shifted to high alert. He told me the deed transfer had just been initiated electronically through the county clerk portal less than 10 minutes ago. Jamal was moving aggressively to secure the asset. I authorized Marcus to execute an immediate hard freeze on the property title and lock down every single account associated with my social security number. Because of my pristine credentials and our established professional history, Marcus completely bypassed the standard 48-hour review protocol. He locked down my house with a level 5 federal fraud alert. Anyone attempting to transfer, borrow against, or leverage the property would instantly trigger a notification to the authorities. Jamal was walking straight into an impenetrable digital wall. Less than an hour later, my personal phone buzzed violently against the mahogany desk. The caller ID flashed with Jamal's name. I took a deep breath, accepted the call, and put him on speakerphone. He did not even bother to say hello. He was screaming so loudly the audio distorted through the small speaker. He demanded to know what exactly I had just done to his banking profile. He yelled that two large men in a tow truck had just backed into his driveway and were currently hooking up his brand new Porsche Panamera. According to the repo agents, his primary business accounts had been entirely frozen due to suspected wire fraud. This sudden freeze caused his massive luxury auto lease payment to bounce hard. Jamal was in an absolute panic, pacing his driveway and shouting obscenities. He threatened to call Connor immediately and tell him I was having a psychotic break. He promised that Connor would divorce me by the end of the week. He swore Connor would leave me completely penniless and humiliated for daring to interfere with his legitimate real estate business. I let him scream until he literally ran out of breath. Then I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice dripping with absolute ice. I told Jamal he was an absolute fool if he thought Connor had any real financial power over my assets. I asked him if he honestly believed I did not know exactly how he afforded that ridiculously overpriced Porsche in the first place. I reminded him about the massive IRS tax lien he incurred 3 years ago when his luxury brokerage failed to report federal income. I gave Rachel $100,000 of my own hard-earned money because she sat right here in my living room crying hysterically about how the government was going to seize their home. I explicitly told her the funds were strictly to pay off the IRS and keep a roof over their children. Instead, Jamal took my money and used it to secure a lease on a flashy sports car to impress his superficial clients. I told him I track every single dollar that leaves my accounts, and I had known about his gross financial negligence and pathetic posturing from day one. A boring bean counter might not seem intimidating, but we always know exactly where the bodies are buried. Jamal went dead silent on the other end of the line. The reality of his absolute ruin was finally sinking in. Before he could formulate another empty, pathetic threat, the heavy gray burner phone sitting on my desk began to vibrate aggressively. The screen lit up with an incoming call from an unsaved number. I immediately ended the call with Jamal cutting off his stammering voice. I picked up the burner phone, pressed the green accept button, and held the cold plastic to my ear. I did not make a single sound. For a few agonizing seconds, there was only heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Then Connor spoke. His voice was completely stripped of his usual charming, polished banker persona. He sounded utterly terrified, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. He asked Jamal if the house transfer was finally done. He said the syndicate guys were getting extremely impatient and violent. Connor whispered into the phone, warning that if they did not have my house to use as hard collateral by tomorrow morning, the cartel enforcers were coming for both of them. I let his desperate, terrified words hang in the silent air of my office for a long moment. A cold, satisfied smile spread across my face as I fully realized the power I now held. Then I simply pressed the red button and hung up the phone, leaving him entirely to his panic. Less than 12 hours later, the heavy brass lock on the front door clicked. I was sitting at the kitchen island drinking black coffee and forcing my heart rate to remain steady. Connor walked in, dropping his leather overnight bag onto the hardwood floor with a heavy, exaggerated sigh. He was playing the part of the exhausted traveling executive to absolute perfection. He walked straight toward me holding a massive bouquet of white peonies, my favorite flowers. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, smelling faintly of expensive mint soap and fresh coffee. "God, I missed you," he said, rubbing his eyes. Chicago was an absolute nightmare. The flight was delayed, the clients were impossible, and I barely slept. "I am so glad to be home with my beautiful wife." I looked up at him, matching his warm smile with one of my own. I reached out and took the flowers, burying my face in the soft petals. "I missed you too, honey," I lied, my voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "You work so hard for us." You need to rest. Connor poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the granite counter. He took a sip and let out a casual chuckle. Actually, before I can completely unwind, I need a huge favor. The compliance guys at the firm sent over a stack of tax disclosures this morning. They need physical signatures from both of us for our joint investment accounts to clear the quarterly audit. It is just routine paperwork, but they are breathing down my neck. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, sliding it across the island toward me. I knew exactly what was inside that folder. Those were not routine tax disclosures. Those were the legal authorizations Jamal desperately needed to bypass the federal fraud alert I had placed on my property. Connor was trying to trick me into unfreezing the very accounts he was using to launder cartel money. I pulled the folder closer and opened it, pretending to casually scan the dense legal jargon. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone light and breezy. "Let me just grab my reading glasses from my home office. My eyes are killing me today." Connor smiled, looking incredibly relieved. "Take your time, babe. I am going to jump in the shower and wash this airplane grime off." I picked up the folder and walked calmly up the stairs. The moment I was out of his line of sight, my entire demeanor shifted. I stepped into my office and moved with absolute precision. I had anticipated this exact move. That morning, I had printed out a stack of standard IRS boilerplate forms documents that looked incredibly official, but authorized absolutely nothing. Using a quick sleight of hand, I removed his fraudulent signature pages and replaced them with my harmless dummy forms. I walked back downstairs just as Connor was heading up to the primary bathroom. I signed the dummy pages right in front of him, handing the folder back with a loving smile. He took the folder and let out a breath he had clearly been holding. He kissed my cheek, thanked me for being so understanding, and closed the bathroom door behind him. The second the shower water turned on, I sprang into action. I grabbed his primary personal phone, which he had carelessly left on the nightstand. I pulled a specialized decryption cable from my pocket and connected his phone directly to my secure laptop. As a forensic auditor, cloning a civilian mobile device is practically child's play. The progress bar flashed across my screen, ripping through his firewalls and mirroring his entire hard drive in less than 2 minutes. While the data transferred, I quietly unzipped his leather briefcase. I took a microscopic GPS tracking dot, no bigger than a shirt button, and slid it deep behind the fabric lining of the interior pocket. No matter where he went next, I would have his exact coordinates. The phone finished syncing just as the shower shut off. I disconnected the cable, placed his phone exactly where I found it, and slipped out of the bedroom unnoticed. Back in my secure office, I opened the clone data files on my monitor. The truth of his fake business trip was instantly revealed. I checked his location history map. Connor had not set foot in an airport. There were no GPS pings in Chicago. Instead, his location data showed he had spent the last 3 days at the Azure Spa and Resort, a highly exclusive luxury retreat just 40 miles away. I dug deeper, accessing his digital wallet and banking apps. A new email notification popped up immediately, catching my eye. It was a digital receipt from a high-end jeweler in the city, dated yesterday afternoon. The total charge was an eye-watering $50,000 for a custom diamond tennis necklace. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered the heavy weight of his briefcase when I was planting the tracker. I crept back out to the hallway, listening to the sound of Connor humming while he dressed in our bedroom. I quietly opened his briefcase one more time, reaching past the fake tax documents. My fingers brushed against a square velvet box hidden at the very bottom. I pulled the box out and snapped the lid open. The brilliant cut diamonds caught the hallway light, sparkling with blinding intensity. It was the most expensive piece of jewelry I had ever held, but it was not meant for me. Tucked neatly underneath the silver clasp of the necklace was a small handwritten card on thick stationery. I recognized Connor's sharp, sloping handwriting immediately. I read the words silently, letting the ultimate betrayal sink into my bones. "To my future wife, Lexi. Soon the old hag will be out of the picture. Forever yours, Lexi." The name hit me with the force of a freight train. Lexi was not just some random woman he met at a bar. Lexi was my mother Patricia's 24-year-old goddaughter. She was the young, beautiful girl Patricia constantly paraded around family events, treating her like the perfect daughter she always wished she had instead of me. My husband was not just plotting my death. He was planning to spend my stolen wealth building a new life with my own mother's golden surrogate child. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk, snapping me out of my horrifying realization. It was a text message from Patricia demanding my presence at her estate for a mandatory family dinner at 7 o'clock sharp. She added a snide little note saying Connor had already confirmed his attendance. I carefully returned the velvet box to the bottom of the briefcase and arranged the dummy tax forms exactly as Connor had left them. I smoothed my hair, adjusted my beige blazer, and walked out of the house. Let them all believe their trap was perfectly set. I drove across town to Patricia's sprawling colonial estate in the Heights district. I walked through the heavy front doors without knocking. The grand dining room was already buzzing with conversation. I stepped into the archway and took inventory of the room. Jamal was sweating profusely in his custom-tailored suit, repeatedly checking his phone with trembling hands. The bank freeze was clearly strangling him. Rachel sat next to him, looking thoroughly annoyed by his panic. Connor was positioned near the head of the table, playing his role flawlessly. He offered me a warm, entirely fake smile as I entered, but my eyes locked onto the chair directly to his right. Lexi sat there radiating youth and entitlement. She wore a crimson silk slip dress that dipped precariously low, and resting right against her collarbone, catching the light from the crystal chandelier overhead, was the $50,000 custom diamond tennis necklace. She reached up and touched the brilliant cut stones, letting her fingers linger on the silver clasp. Her smug, self-satisfied smirk told me everything I needed to know. She knew exactly whose money paid for those diamonds. I pulled out the only empty chair directly across from Lexi and sat down. Patricia surveyed the table with a look of absolute triumph. She immediately zeroed in on my outfit. Her eyes raked over my practical blazer and sensible heels. "Vanessa, you really should let Lexi take you shopping," Patricia sneered, pouring herself a glass of Merlot. "You always show up to these dinners looking like you are about to audit a paper factory." Lexi has such vibrant feminine energy. Men appreciate a woman who actually puts effort into her appearance. Rachel eagerly jumped into the conversation. "It is true, Vanessa," she said, twisting her fork in her salad. "You spend all your time buried in cold spreadsheets. No wonder Connor is always working late. A man needs warmth and affection to come home to, not a human calculator." Connor let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. He rubbed his temples, acting like the exhausted, misunderstood husband trying to keep the peace. "Now, Rachel, do not be too harsh on her," Connor said, his voice dripping with condescending sympathy. "Vanessa works very hard, even if her career obsession does take a severe toll on our marriage and our future." I kept my face completely blank. Beneath the expensive mahogany table, I watched Connor's hand slip off his knee and land firmly on Lexi's thigh. Lexi bit her lip and let out a soft, breathy giggle. She leaned closer to him, completely ignoring the fact that his wife was sitting 2 feet away. "Lexi wants a big family," Patricia announced proudly, reaching over to pat the younger girl's hand. "She understands what is truly important in life. She knows how to nurture a household. She is basically family already. She understands exactly how to treat a real man, unlike some people who are too selfish to even give their husband a child." The sheer cruelty of the attack was designed to break me, to make me cry and storm out of the house so they could laugh behind my back. But I was not the same woman they had bullied for decades. I was a senior forensic auditor actively investigating a $5 million cartel money laundering scheme orchestrated by the very people sitting at this table. I reached for the open bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon in the center of the table. My hand did not shake. I smoothly poured a generous measure into my crystal glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the rich flavor. Then I set the glass down and looked directly into Lexi's eyes. "That necklace looks absolutely beautiful on you, Lexi," I said, my voice echoing cleanly through the dining room. "It is a stunning piece. I really hope you enjoy wearing it before the IRS Criminal Division seizes it as stolen property." The entire room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Lex's hand froze midair, hovering just above the diamonds. Connor stood up violently. His heavy wooden chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He slammed his palms flat onto the table, his charming facade instantly shattering. "What the hell are you talking about, Vanessa?" he demanded, his face flushing a deep angry red. "Have you completely lost your mind?" I reached into my leather tote bag. I pulled out a thick stack of printed papers. It was the master ledger from his encrypted offshore accounts, cleanly formatted and fully decrypted. I tossed the heavy stack directly onto the center of the dining table. The papers fanned out, displaying rows of illegal wire transfers, shell company tax identification numbers, and the massive $5 million deficit. "I am talking about the wire transfers, Connor," I said, keeping my tone conversational and light. "I mean the funds you illegally transferred from Jamal's fraudulent shell company to buy your little girlfriend a trinket. I highlighted the exact routing numbers where you funneled cartel cash through the Cayman Islands and directly into the checking account of a downtown jeweler. The same shell company you two brilliant masterminds are using to launder money for a violent criminal syndicate." Jamal shot out of his chair, gasping for air like a drowning man. He looked at the spreadsheets and then looked at Connor with pure, unadulterated terror. "Oh, and Mom," I added, turning my attention to the head of the table. "You might want to sit back and take a deep breath for this next part." Jamal needed massive initial capital to open his fake brokerage firm and secure those first few offshore properties for the cartel. He needed a clean, verifiable asset to leverage. He used your entire pension and retirement fund as the initial collateral. Patricia dropped her wine glass. The crystal shattered against her plate, sending dark red wine spilling across the pristine white tablecloth like blood. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The bank froze. "Jamal's accounts this afternoon," I continued, twisting the knife. "The syndicate is calling in their debts. Your retirement fund is completely gone, Mom. You are broke, destitute, penniless." Patricia let out a high-pitched wheezing sound. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed sideways in her elegant dining chair, fainting dead away onto the floor. Patricia lay crumpled on the Persian rug, looking like a discarded marionette. Rachel immediately dropped to her knees, shrieking for Jamal to call an ambulance. Jamal, however, was completely frozen. He stared at the printed spreadsheet I had thrown on the table, his jaw working furiously as he tried to formulate a coherent lie. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the crystal chandelier. He finally snapped out of his trance and began waving his arms wildly in the air. He shouted that my documents were fabricated garbage and the frozen accounts were nothing more than a temporary banking glitch. He claimed his broker had simply made a minor clerical error regarding some routine compliance forms, and the funds would absolutely be available by morning. Nobody was listening to his pathetic excuses. Connor grabbed my upper arm. His grip was viciously tight, his fingers digging painfully into my muscle. The charming, polished investment banker mask was completely gone. The man glaring down at me was a cornered, desperate animal. He yanked me away from the dining table, completely ignoring the chaos unfolding around Patricia on the floor. He dragged me through the grand foyer and shoved me out the heavy oak front doors into the cool night air. I did not struggle or cry out. I let him pull me down the long paved driveway toward my car, maintaining my absolute professional composure. He needed to feel like he was in control, right up until the exact moment he realized he had lost everything. Connor pinned me against the driver's side door of my sedan. His chest was heaving, and his breath came in ragged, uneven bursts. "You think you are so brilliant?" He snarled, his face just inches from mine. "You think a few frozen accounts and some printed spreadsheets make you untouchable? You are going to call your banking contacts and unfreeze Jamal's LLC right now, Vanessa. If you do not comply immediately, I am going to systematically destroy your entire existence." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous, menacing whisper. He told me he still had the administrative backdoor access codes to my firm's internal servers from when he helped me upgrade my home office network last year. He threatened to remotely plant highly illegal explicit material directly onto my encrypted work laptop. He said he would call the federal authorities anonymously and report me as a distributor. He painted a vivid, horrifying picture of the FBI raiding my office, seizing my corporate devices, and publicly ruining my pristine career before locking me away in a federal penitentiary for decades. I stared right back into his venomous eyes. My pulse remained perfectly steady. I shoved his hand off my arm and calmly straightened the lapels of my beige blazer. "You tried this exact same psychological manipulation 10 years ago, Connor," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. I reminded him of the time I caught him skimming thousands of dollars from my dedicated college savings fund to cover his reckless offshore gambling debts. Back then, he had threatened to tell my strict family I was a heavy drug addict, to thoroughly discredit my accusations before I could even make them. "I was a naive 23-year-old girl when you pulled that stunt," I told him, stepping out of his personal space. "I cried and I backed down because I desperately wanted to believe you loved me and that it was just a one-time mistake. But I am not that terrified girl anymore. I am a senior forensic investigator who routinely takes down multi-million-dollar corporate fraud rings. I secure my networks with rolling biometric multi-factor authentication protocols that scramble and change every 60 seconds. You could not hack into my servers if your miserable life depended on it, which ironically, it actually does right now." I pulled my car keys from my pocket and unlocked the door. The bright headlights flashed, illuminating his pale, terrified face. "You have until tomorrow morning to pack your bags and get out of my house," I said, opening the door and sliding into the driver's seat. "Enjoy the rapidly diminishing time you have left as a free man." I shut the door, locked it, and reversed out of the driveway, leaving him standing entirely alone in the dark. By the time I returned to my own quiet suburban home, the lingering adrenaline was finally beginning to settle. I poured myself a tall glass of cold water and walked directly into my secure office. Just as I sat down behind my desk, my encrypted laptop began to chime. It was an incoming video call request routed through the burner phone application. I engaged my virtual private network masking protocol and accepted the secure connection. Lex's face filled the screen. She was no longer the smug, arrogant girl who had been sitting at Patricia's dining table wearing my stolen diamond necklace. Her perfect hair was a tangled, chaotic mess, and her expensive mascara was running in thick black rivers down her tear-stained cheeks. The camera shook violently as she held the phone. She was hiding inside a dark, narrow closet, clutching her knees tightly to her chest. She sobbed hysterically into the receiver, begging me to help her. Lexi managed to choke out that several heavily armed men wearing tactical gear had just kicked down the reinforced front door of her luxury downtown apartment. They tore the entire place apart, destroying her furniture and screaming for Connor. She clamped a trembling hand over her mouth to muffle a fresh wave of terrified sobs. She leaned into the camera and whispered that the men left a horrifying message before they abandoned the wrecked apartment. They told her that if Connor and Jamal do not deliver the missing $5 million by Friday at midnight, they are coming back to take the payment in blood. Patricia let out a high-pitched wheezing sound. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed sideways in her elegant dining chair, fainting dead away onto the floor. Absolute panic erupted in the dining room. Rachel screamed and dropped to her knees beside our unconscious mother, frantically slapping her cheeks and shouting for someone to call an ambulance. Lexi leaped up from her chair, knocking over her crystal water glass. She backed away from the table as if the printed spreadsheets I had just thrown down were covered in a deadly poison. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching the $50,000 diamond necklace in sheer terror. Jamal was hyperventilating. He clawed at his silk tie, loosening his collar, while shaking his head violently back and forth. He pointed a trembling, sweating finger at me, his voice cracking under the massive weight of his panic. "She is lying," he shouted to the room at large, his eyes wild and desperate. "It is a banking glitch. That is all it is. My broker made a minor clerical error with the international compliance forms. The funds will be completely cleared and available by tomorrow morning. Do not listen to a single word this crazy witch says." But nobody was listening to his pathetic excuses. The undeniable proof was sitting right there in black and white for anyone brave enough to read it. Connor did not say a word. The charming, polished investment banker mask he had worn for a decade completely disintegrated. His handsome face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged around the heavy mahogany table and grabbed my upper arm. His grip was viciously tight, his fingers digging painfully into my muscle like steel clamps. He yanked me out of my chair, completely ignoring the medical chaos unfolding around Patricia on the floor. "Get up!" he snarled through clenched teeth. He dragged me backward through the grand foyer. My sensible heels slipped against the polished marble tiles, but I did not struggle or cry out. I let him pull me out the heavy oak front doors and into the cool night air. I maintained my absolute professional composure. He needed to feel like he was in physical control right up until the exact moment he realized he had legally lost everything. He shoved me hard against the driver's side door of my sedan. His chest was heaving and his breath came in ragged, uneven bursts. "You think you are so smart?" He spat his face just inches from mine. "You think a few frozen accounts and some printed spreadsheets make you untouchable? You think you can just waltz in here and ruin my life?" I stared at him calmly, refusing to break eye contact. "I am untouchable, Connor, because I do not leave a digital footprint for sloppy amateurs like you to follow." He let out a dark, menacing laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "You are going to call your banking contacts and unfreeze Jamal's LLC right now, Vanessa. If you do not comply immediately, I am going to systematically destroy your entire existence." He leaned in closer, pressing his forearm against my chest to pin me to the car. His voice dropped to a dangerous, threatening whisper. "You seem to forget that I still have the administrative backdoor access codes to your firm's internal servers from when I helped you upgrade your home office network last year. If those offshore funds are not released by midnight, I will remotely plant highly illegal child explicit material directly onto your encrypted work laptop. I will call the feds myself and report you as a primary distributor. I will thoroughly destroy your pristine career and ensure you are locked away in a federal penitentiary for the rest of your miserable life." I did not flinch. My pulse remained perfectly steady. I shoved his heavy arm off my chest and casually smoothed the lapels of my beige blazer. "You tried this exact same psychological manipulation when I caught you stealing from my college fund 10 years ago," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. I watched his eyes widen slightly at the forgotten memory. I remembered the night I discovered he had skimmed thousands of dollars from my dedicated savings account to cover his reckless offshore sports gambling debts. Back then, he had viciously threatened to tell my strict parents that I was a heavy drug addict. He wanted to thoroughly discredit my accusations before I could even make them. He had cornered me and told me no one would ever believe a junkie over the perfect golden boy. I stepped out of his personal space, standing tall and unbothered. "I was a naive 23-year-old girl when you pulled that stunt, Connor," I cried, and I backed down because I desperately wanted to believe you loved me and that it was just a one-time mistake. But I am not a naive 23-year-old anymore. I am a senior forensic investigator who routinely takes down multi-million-dollar corporate fraud rings. I secured my networks with rolling biometric multi-factor authentication protocols the day after we got married because I knew exactly what kind of snake you were. You could not hack into my servers if your miserable life depended on it. Which, ironically, it actually does right now. I pulled my car keys from my pocket and unlocked the door. The bright headlights flashed, illuminating his pale, terrified face. "You have until tomorrow morning to pack your bags and get out of my house," I said, opening the door and sliding into the driver's seat. "Enjoy the rapidly diminishing time you have left as a free man." I shut the door, locked it, and reversed out of the long driveway, leaving him standing entirely alone in the dark. By the time I returned to my own quiet suburban home, the lingering adrenaline was finally beginning to settle. I poured myself a tall glass of cold water and walked directly into my secure home office. Just as I sat down behind my desk, my encrypted laptop began to chime loudly. It was an incoming video call request, routed through a highly secure burner phone application. I engaged my virtual private network, masking protocol, and accepted the secure connection. Lex's face filled the screen. She was no longer the smug, arrogant girl who had been sitting at Patricia's dining table wearing my stolen diamond necklace. Her perfect hair was a tangled, chaotic mess, and her expensive mascara was running in thick black rivers down her tear-stained cheeks. The camera shook violently as she held the phone. She was hiding inside a dark, narrow closet, clutching her knees tightly to her chest. "Vanessa, please," she sobbed hysterically into the receiver, her voice muffled and frantic. "You have to help me. They are going to kill me." I leaned closer to the monitor. "What is going on, Lexi? Men with guns just kicked down my apartment door?" She choked out, gasping for air. "They tore the entire place apart looking for Connor." I hid in the utility closet when I heard them smashing the front windows. She clamped a trembling hand over her mouth to muffle a fresh wave of terrified sobs. She leaned into the camera, her eyes wide with pure primal panic. "They left a message before they walked out, Vanessa. They said if they do not get their $5 million by Friday at midnight, they are taking it out in blood." I ended the secure video connection immediately, the black screen reflecting my cold, determined expression. I spent the rest of the night awake running diagnostic checks on my home network, fortifying my digital firewalls, and preparing my final evidentiary files for the federal authorities. The cartel was moving much faster than I had anticipated. Connor and Jamal were officially out of time. But before I could submit my finalized audit report, the heavy glass door to my private office swung violently open. The morning sun was barely rising over the city skyline, but Rachel had already managed to look like a complete disaster. The golden child of our family stormed into my auditing firm, hyperventilating and shaking with rage. Her designer sunglasses were shoved haphazardly into her messy hair, and she was clutching her expensive leather handbag like a life preserver. She slammed the heavy bag directly onto my desk and glared at me with bloodshot eyes. My platinum card just declined at the boutique. "Vanessa?" She shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "I tried 3 different Premier accounts, and the bank teller told me everything is frozen under a federal hold. You have to wire me $50,000 right now. Jamal is not answering his phone, and Mom is still in the hospital under strict observation from her fainting spell last night. I have vendors to pay for my upcoming charity gala, and I will not be humiliated. You owe me this money." I stared at her, completely unfazed by her pathetic temper tantrum. She actually believed she could waltz into my federal auditing firm and demand cash after spending her entire life treating me like absolute garbage. I stood up slowly from my leather ergonomic chair and walked over to the heavy glass door. I closed it firmly and turned the deadbolt, locking us securely inside. I pressed a button on the wall, lowering the motorized privacy blinds and completely shutting out the rest of the bustling office. Rachel watched me with a sudden flicker of genuine uncertainty. Her arrogant, demanding posture deflated as I walked back to my desk and opened my locked bottom drawer. I pulled out a glossy 8x10 photograph and slid it across the smooth glass surface directly toward her. "Pick it up, Rachel," I commanded, my voice dropping to a sharp, dangerous octave. "Take a very close look at the date and the signature on the intake form." Rachel picked up the photo with trembling fingers. It was a high-resolution copy of a recent private medical exam, specifically an independent insurance physical conducted at a premier clinic downtown. The patient listed on the official medical intake form was Vanessa Thorne. But the woman sitting on the examination table in the photograph, clearly captured by the clinic's internal security cameras, was Rachel. "You committed medical and insurance fraud by pretending to be me, Rachel," I said, leaning over the desk and bracing my hands on the glass. "You presented my identification documents to a licensed physician and signed federal paperwork claiming to be my legal proxy. That is a Class A felony. You are looking at a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Rachel's face drained of all color, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. The glossy photograph slipped from her fingers and fluttered onto the floor. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed heavily into the leather guest chair. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob uncontrollably. The arrogant golden child was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal who had finally been caught in her own web of lies. I did not want to do it, Vanessa, she wailed, rocking back and forth in the chair like a frightened child. Mom forced me into it. She said you were too stubborn and too obsessed with your career to ever sign the paperwork willingly. Connor came to us months ago with a massive comprehensive life insurance policy he had secretly taken out on you. The payout was staggering. $5 million in the event of an accidental or unexpected death. Connor needed a clean medical exam to finalize the underwriting process, but he knew you would never agree to it without asking questions. He promised Mom and me a flat 20% cut of the entire $5 million payout if I just took the physical for you. Mom told me it was the only way to secure our family legacy. We needed the cash, Vanessa. Jamal's real estate investments were tanking and we were drowning in massive debt. I stood frozen, processing the magnitude of their absolute betrayal. My own mother and sister had conspired with my husband to insure my life for $5 million and then profit from my impending death. They were not just laundering money for a violent cartel, they were actively orchestrating my murder to solve their offshore debt crisis. The sheer depravity of their greed was almost difficult to comprehend. I rounded the desk and grabbed Rachel by the shoulders, pulling her forcefully out of the chair. "You sold my life for $1 million, I snarled, shaking her hard. "You agreed to help Connor kill me for a payout." Rachel sobbed louder, shaking her head frantically from side to side. Her eyes were wide with pure animal terror. "No, Vanessa, you do not understand," she choked out, gripping my wrist with her trembling, manicured hands. "You think they are just waiting for you to have a convenient accident? You think Connor is planning this alone. He is not. Jamal is the one pulling the strings. Jamal knows the cartel is coming for the money by Friday, and he is in absolute panic mode. He cannot wait for a random accident anymore." Rachel gasped for air, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Jamal hired a professional mechanic from the syndicate. They are not waiting for you to die naturally, Vanessa. Jamal paid the guy to tamper with your car brakes tomorrow morning." I ended the secure video connection immediately, the black screen reflecting my cold, determined expression. I spent the rest of the night awake running diagnostic checks on my home network, fortifying my digital firewalls, and preparing my final evidentiary files for the federal authorities. The cartel was moving much faster than I had anticipated. Connor and Jamal were officially out of time. By dawn, my trap had been flawlessly executed. My internal server logs displayed a beautiful story of utter desperation. Connor had spent the entire night frantically trying to breach my home network from his laptop in the guest bedroom. Around 4 in the morning, he finally stumbled upon the back door I had intentionally left unpatched. He took the bait instantly. He bypassed the dummy firewalls and transferred what he believed was $5 million from my fake offshore honeypot directly into the syndicate's routing accounts. He had no idea the funds were completely fabricated digital ghosts. Even worse, he had absolutely no clue that executing that specific transfer protocol triggered a silent cascade effect, transmitting the cartel's entire hidden master ledger straight to the FBI Cybercrimes Division. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heard the heavy thud of footsteps coming down the hardwood stairs. I was sitting at the kitchen island, calmly sipping a cup of black coffee, when Connor swaggered into the room. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, carrying 2 massive designer leather suitcases. He dropped the heavy bags onto the floor with a loud, triumphant thud. "You really thought you could outsmart me, Vanessa?" he sneered, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. "You actually thought a few frozen accounts and some cheap threats could keep me down. I am an investment banker. I built my entire career outmaneuvering people 10 times smarter than you." He walked over to the granite counter and poured himself a cup of coffee, moving with an infuriatingly relaxed confidence. "I hacked your precious secure servers last night," he boasted, taking a slow, arrogant sip. "I bypassed your ridiculous little firewalls and transferred the $5 million right out from under your nose. The syndicate is paid off, Jamal's shell company is completely clear, and I am officially walking away a very wealthy man." I kept my expression completely blank, watching him parade around my kitchen. "I am leaving you, Vanessa," he announced, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across his face. I am taking the money, and I am taking Lexi. We are moving to a private island in the Caribbean where the weather is warm and the women actually know how to please a man. You can stay here in this boring suburban prison and rot with your spreadsheets. You are a cold, obsessed, unlovable machine and you deserve to die completely alone. Before I could offer a response, my cell phone began ringing loudly on the marble counter. The caller ID displayed Patricia's name in bold letters. Connor let out a loud, barking laugh. Go ahead and answer it, he mocked, gesturing toward the phone. I texted them the good news 10 minutes ago. She probably wants to offer her condolences on your incredibly sad, pathetic divorce. I reached forward and answered the call, putting it on speakerphone and activating my encrypted call recording software with a single swipe. Vanessa Patricia practically sang, her voice dripping with sheer malicious joy. I just heard the wonderful news. Connor is finally leaving your toxic, suffocating energy. He is going to give Lexi the beautiful, wealthy life she actually deserves. I remained perfectly silent, letting her dig her own grave. Jamal just checked his banking dashboard. Patricia continued, her tone shifting into a gloating sneer. The accounts are completely flushed with cash again. The syndicate is satisfied, and our family legacy is entirely secure. You thought you could destroy us, but you failed miserably. You are a bitter, jealous little girl who could not handle the fact that my goddaughter is younger, prettier, and significantly better at keeping your husband satisfied. I took another calm sip of my coffee, making sure the recording captured every single syllable. You tried to freeze our assets and ruin our cartel arrangements. Patricia laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. But Connor outsmarted you. He took your money and secured our future. See, Vanessa, God always punishes bad daughters. You deserve to be completely abandoned. Do not ever show your face at my estate again. Patricia ended the call with a sharp click. I locked my phone and slid it back across the granite counter. I had just captured a crystal-clear recorded admission of guilt. Patricia had gleefully confirmed her explicit knowledge of the stolen funds, the cartel arrangements, and the money laundering conspiracy. It was the final nail in her federal coffin. Connor chuckled, picking up his briefcase and adjusting his expensive silk tie. Well, he said, flashing me one last smug, self-satisfied grin, I think that perfectly concludes our business here. I have a first-class flight to catch and a beautiful young woman waiting for me. Goodbye, Vanessa. Enjoy your sad, empty life. He turned around and strode confidently toward the front of the house. He grabbed the brass handle of the heavy oak front door and pulled it wide open, ready to step out into his brilliant new future. But he did not take a single step forward. Jamal was standing on the front porch blocking the exit. Connor froze, his arrogant smile instantly melting away. Jamal looked like he had been dragged behind a moving vehicle. His custom-tailored suit was ripped into shredded, muddy rags. His face was a swollen mass of severe purple bruises. He was trembling violently and bleeding profusely from a split lip and a deep gash over his left eye. He looked like a man who had just stared directly into the eyes of the devil. Before Connor could even process the horrific sight, Jamal lunged forward with the speed of a desperate, cornered predator. He grabbed Connor directly by the throat, driving him backward into the foyer with a ferocious, terrifying strength. Connor dropped his leather briefcase, gasping and clawing frantically at Jamal's bloody hands. The money you sent the syndicate was fake! You arrogant idiot! Jamal screamed, spittle flying from his ruined mouth and splattering across Connor's pristine white shirt. The transfer bounced. The dashboard showed pending funds, but it was a digital ghost. The cartel realized they were being played. Connor choked, his eyes bulging with absolute horror as Jamal's grip tightened around his windpipe. They came to my house this morning. Jamal sobbed hysterically, tears streaming down his battered face. They dragged me out of bed and beat me half to death right in front of the kids. They said we insulted them. They said a fake wire transfer is an act of war. Jamal shoved Connor hard against the hallway wall, shaking him so violently that Connor's head snapped back against the drywall. They took Rachel. Jamal screamed, his voice breaking into a guttural, horrifying wail. The cartel just took my wife as collateral, and they said if they do not get their actual $5 million in unmarked physical cash by midnight, they are going to start mailing her back to me in pieces. Jamal's grip on Connor's throat finally slipped as a violent coughing fit seized his battered chest. Connor shoved him backward with a heavy curse, and Jamal stumbled hard into the mahogany console table, sending a priceless crystal vase crashing to the floor. The sharp sound of shattering glass echoed through the grand foyer, but neither man seemed to care. Jamal collapsed onto his knees, crawling over the sharp shards of crystal directly toward the living room, where I stood watching the entire pathetic spectacle. The once smug, arrogant real estate broker was completely destroyed. Blood dripped from his split lip, staining his teeth and spilling onto my expensive Persian rug. He grabbed the hem of my silk trousers, his ruined face looking up at me with absolute sheer desperation. "Vanessa, please!" He sobbed uncontrollably, his tears mixing with the blood on his chin. "You have to fix the digital transfer. You have to log back into your encrypted server and wire the real funds to the syndicate. They took Rachel. They dragged her right out of our bed. I will sign over my entire real estate portfolio to you. I will give you every single asset I own if you just save my wife from the cartel." Connor stood in the hallway, rubbing his bruised neck and staring at me with a mixture of terror and dawning realization. The arrogant investment banker finally understood the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. My honeypot trap had completely sealed his fate. I had not just frozen his accounts. I had actively weaponized his own insatiable greed against him, making him look like a thief to one of the most ruthless criminal organizations in the world. He thought he was moving actual cash to save his skin, but he had merely transmitted a digital tracking beacon straight to the federal authorities. I casually stepped back, pulling my trouser leg out of Jamal's bloody grasp. I walked over to the velvet living room couch and sat down, gracefully smoothing the fabric of my trousers. I picked up my porcelain cup of chamomile tea from the side table and took a slow, deliberate sip. The warm liquid felt incredibly soothing against the backdrop of their absolute panic. "You are begging the wrong person, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Why on earth should I help the man who plotted to steal my house and actively helped fake my medical records for a fraudulent life insurance policy?" Jamal wiped his bloody nose with the back of his trembling hand, smearing the crimson stain across his cheek. "Because we are family, Vanessa," he yelled, his voice cracking with hysterical panic. "You cannot just let them butcher Rachel. We are blood. I am the man who gave you away at your wedding. I stood by you when Dad passed away. You owe me this." I set my teacup down with a sharp, definitive clink against the glass table. "I do not owe you a single breath," I shot back, leaning forward and locking my eyes onto his panicked face. "You walked me down the aisle because you were desperately hoping to secure a massive commercial loan from Connor's investment bank. You needed his signature to save your failing strip mall project, and playing the loving, protective brother was just your sickeningly convenient bargaining chip. You have used me to prop up your pathetic lifestyle since day one." I watched Jamal flinch as the brutal truth hit him. "You sold my life for a 20% cut of a $5 million payout," I reminded him coldly, the anger finally bleeding into my tone. "You hired a syndicate mechanic to tamper with my car brakes yesterday so you could collect the insurance money and pay off your cartel debt. You tried to put me in a morgue, Jamal, and now you want me to save the woman who happily signed my death warrant." Connor suddenly snapped out of his stunned silence. The sheer panic of realizing the cartel would be hunting him next finally overrode his logical reasoning. He lunged toward his dropped leather briefcase in the foyer. His hands moved frantically, tearing through the side compartments until he pulled out a heavy black steel handgun. He racked the slide with a sharp metallic clack and marched directly into the living room. He leveled the barrel of the gun squarely at my chest. His hands were shaking so violently I thought he might accidentally pull the trigger. "Log into the damn server right now, Vanessa!" he screamed, his handsome face completely contorted with desperate madness. "Unfreeze the real accounts and wire the $5 million to the syndicate's offshore routing numbers. You are going to fix this massive mess you created, or I swear to God, I will make the life insurance payout happen tonight." I stared down the dark barrel of the gun, my pulse barely accelerating. "You shoot me, Connor, and you will never see a single dime of that money," I stated, maintaining my absolute composure. "You do not have my biometric passwords. If my heart stops, my servers automatically scrub every single digital ledger and encrypt the offshore vaults permanently. You will be entirely broke and running from a cartel death squad for the incredibly brief remainder of your life." Connor gritted his teeth, stepping closer and pressing the cold steel of the gun barrel directly against my forehead. "I am not playing games with you, Vanessa," he snarled, his eyes completely unhinged. "Log into the system right now." Just as his finger tightened against the trigger, a sudden intense burst of flashing red and blue lights swept violently across the living room windows. The bright, strobing colors illuminated Connor's terrified face and cast long, frantic shadows across the walls. A heavy mechanical siren chirped loudly, cutting through the tense silence of the house. The harsh, commanding voice of a federal agent boomed through a high-powered megaphone outside, demanding that everyone step away from the doors and come out with their hands raised. Connor's eyes darted frantically around the room. The color instantly vanished from his handsome face. He lowered the heavy black handgun, staring in absolute shock at the flashing red and blue lights painting the living room walls. The booming voice outside echoed again through the heavy glass windows, but as my adrenaline spiked, the actual words finally became clear. They identified themselves not as the federal agents from the cybercrimes unit I had anticipated, but as the local municipal police department. They were using their cruiser's public address system, demanding immediate entry for a mandatory wellness check. Connor shoved the weapon deep under the heavy velvet cushions of the sofa, his hands trembling so violently he could barely conceal the dark steel grip. Jamal was still bleeding profusely on the hardwood floor, clutching his ruined face and sobbing into his torn collar. He looked ready to vomit from the sheer terror of the cartel and the sudden arrival of law enforcement. "Get up!" Connor hissed viciously, kicking Jamal hard in the leg. "Get up right now and shut your pathetic mouth. Do not say a single word." Connor ran a frantic hand through his perfectly styled hair, forcing his spiraling panic down and plastering on the charming polished mask he used to manipulate his wealthy clients. The heavy oak front door shuddered under a series of loud, aggressive knocks. Connor rushed into the grand foyer and swung the door wide open. Two uniformed local police officers stood on the porch, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. "I am so incredibly relieved you are here, officers," Connor said, his voice cracking with a masterful display of artificial emotion. He ran a hand over his face, playing the role of the terrified, exhausted husband flawlessly. "It is my wife. My mother-in-law, Patricia, called you right. She told me she was going to ask for an emergency wellness check because things have gotten completely out of hand in this house." Connor stepped aside, gesturing for the officers to enter the grand foyer. Jamal scrambled into the dark shadows of the hallway, trying desperately to hide his battered, bleeding face. The officers stepped inside their tactical boots, crunching over the shards of the shattered crystal vase. Their flashlights swept across the foyer before landing directly on me. I remained seated calmly on the velvet couch, holding my porcelain teacup without a single tremor in my hands. "She is having a severe psychotic break," Connor whispered loudly enough for the officers to hear every single syllable. He let out a theatrical sob, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "She has been under immense pressure at her financial auditing firm. She started having massive delusions tonight, claiming that her own family was trying to murder her for insurance money. She completely drained our joint savings accounts and locked me out of our home network. She even attacked my brother-in-law Jamal tonight in a fit of rage. Look at what she did to him." Jamal whimpered perfectly on cue, shielding his bruised, swollen face from the officer's bright flashlights. Connor turned back to the cops, looking exactly like a broken, desperate man at the end of his rope. "I just wanted to get her to a hospital safely. We love her so much, but she is completely detached from reality. Please, you have to help me commit her for a psychiatric evaluation before she hurts herself or someone else." The older officer stepped into the living room, keeping a cautious professional distance. "Mom," he said, his tone practiced and soothing. "We received a frantic call from your mother stating you were acting erratically and threatening your family members. Can you slowly stand up for me, please?" I did not raise my voice. I did not scream about the cartel or the fake life insurance policies or the loaded handgun currently buried beneath the velvet cushions. I knew exactly what Patricia and Connor were trying to do. Patricia had maliciously called in the wellness check to establish a documented paper trail of insanity. They wanted me to look completely hysterical. They wanted me to scream wildly about assassins and offshore wire transfers so the police would immediately slap handcuffs on my wrists and drag me to a locked psychiatric ward. That would entirely invalidate my fraud claims and give Connor the perfect window to retrieve his hidden gun and escape the country. Instead, I set my teacup down with a soft click and gracefully stood up, smoothing the silk fabric of my trousers. I walked calmly over to the officers and reached slowly into the front pocket of my beige blazer. Connor flinched, expecting a weapon, but I simply withdrew my sleek black business card and handed it to the older officer. "I am perfectly fine, officers," I said, my voice projecting absolute professional authority. "My name is Vanessa Thorne. I am a senior forensic investigator for the federal government. My husband is simply under a tremendous amount of stress because of his massive upcoming promotion gala at his investment firm tomorrow night. The pressure has caused a rather unfortunate and highly exaggerated family argument." The officers glanced down at my high-level federal credentials and then looked back up at Connor. His fake tears and dramatic trembling suddenly looked incredibly foolish against my absolute, unwavering calmness. "There is no psychiatric emergency taking place here," I continued, offering a polite, reassuring smile. "My mother tends to overreact to simple marital disputes. I assure you everyone is entirely safe and the argument is completely over. We deeply apologize for taking up the police department's valuable time tonight." The officers exchanged a long look, completely deflated by my composed, rational demeanor. They checked my identification against their dispatch notes. Finding no outstanding warrants or immediate physical threats, they nodded in agreement. "If you are sure you are safe, Mom, we will take our leave," the older officer said, handing my card back. "Have a good night and try to keep the noise down." Connor stood completely paralyzed as the officers walked out the front door and pulled out of the driveway. The flashing red and blue lights faded quietly into the dark suburban night, leaving the house in total silence. The moment the police cruiser turned the corner, Connor let out a harsh, arrogant laugh. He marched back into the living room, his chest puffed out with triumphant superiority. He thought he had completely outmaneuvered me. He truly believed my refusal to turn him over to the local police was a sign of weakness and fear. "You see that, Vanessa?" He gloated, a malicious, ugly smirk twisting his handsome face. "No one believes you. You are completely alone in this. Even with the cops standing right in your living room, you were too terrified to say a single word about the money. You know you have absolutely no real proof against me. You are nothing but a pathetic, paranoid woman, and I am walking out of here a rich man." I picked up my teacup and took a slow, deliberate sip, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact. I let his arrogant laughter echo off the high ceilings for several seconds before I finally spoke. "I did not need those local municipal officers to arrest you today, Connor," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, chilling whisper. "I let them leave because handing you over for a simple domestic dispute would completely ruin my actual plan. I need you entirely free and walking the streets. More importantly, I need you to show up at your prestigious firm promotion gala tomorrow evening." Connor's arrogant smirk faltered instantly. His eyes narrowed in deep suspicion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice losing its confident edge. I smiled, a cold, predatory expression that finally made the blood drain entirely from his face. "If you do not show up to your own promotion gala tomorrow night and stand on that stage in front of your wealthy clients and your entire corporate board, I will personally send the real unencrypted digital ledger directly to the syndicate bosses. They already have Jamal, and they have Rachel. But if you try to run before tomorrow night, I will give them your exact GPS coordinates and the master keys to your hidden offshore accounts. You are going to put on a tuxedo and smile for the cameras tomorrow, Connor, because your spectacular public downfall has only just begun." The blinding red and blue strobe lights swept violently across the living room walls, casting chaotic, shifting shadows across Connor's terrified face. The heavy mechanical siren chirped once, cutting through the suffocating tension in the room. A harsh, commanding voice echoed through a high-powered megaphone outside, demanding that the occupants step away from the doors and make their presence known. Connor completely froze. The manic, desperate energy that had fueled him just seconds ago instantly evaporated. He stared down at the heavy, black steel handgun in his trembling grip, as if he had absolutely no idea how it got there. He was a wealthy, privileged investment banker who engaged in white-collar fraud from the safety of a high-rise office. He was not a hardened cartel enforcer. The reality of standing in his own living room holding a loaded weapon with law enforcement parked on his front lawn completely shattered his fragile nerves. He spun around wildly, searching for a place to ditch the evidence. He lunged toward the oversized velvet sofa and violently shoved the handgun deep underneath the heavy back cushions, burying it as far out of sight as possible. He scrambled backward, his chest heaving as he frantically tried to smooth the wrinkles out of his expensive suit jacket. Jamal was still curled on the floor, bleeding onto the expensive Persian rug. He let out a pathetic whimpering sound, trying to drag himself into the dark shadows of the hallway to hide his ruined face. A loud, authoritative knock hammered against the heavy oak front door. It was not the rhythmic pounding of a federal raid or the silent, deadly breach of a cartel hit squad. It was the standard, heavy-handed knock of local municipal police. Connor closed his eyes and let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. He realized instantly what was happening. This was not the FBI Cybercrimes Division. This was the exact contingency plan he and Patricia had meticulously crafted just in case I refused to comply with their financial demands. Patricia had called the local precinct to request an emergency wellness check. Her explicit goal was to officially report me to the authorities as dangerously mentally unstable. They needed a documented police report claiming I was experiencing a severe psychotic break. It was the perfect gaslighting strategy to entirely discredit any financial accusations I might try to make against them in the future. Connor marched into the grand foyer and swung the heavy front door wide open. The instant the cool night air hit his face, his entire demeanor fundamentally transformed. The violent, desperate criminal vanished. In his place stood a broken, terrified, and thoroughly exhausted husband. Two uniformed local police officers stood on the porch, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, sweeping over Connor's disheveled appearance. "Officers, thank God you are finally here." Connor choked out his voice, cracking with a masterful display of artificial emotion. He ran a trembling hand over his face, forcing a remarkably convincing tear to spill over his eyelashes. "I did not know what else to do." "My mother-in-law called you right. She told me she was going to ask for a wellness check because things have gotten completely out of control." He stepped back, leaving the doorway open and gesturing helplessly into the house. "Please come inside," he pleaded, his voice thick with fake worry. "It is my wife, Vanessa. She is having a massive psychotic break. She has been under immense pressure at her financial auditing firm, and her mind just completely snapped tonight. She started having these massive, terrifying delusions claiming that her entire family is conspiring to murder her for insurance money." The officers stepped into the foyer, their boots crunching loudly over the shards of the shattered crystal vase Jamal had destroyed earlier. They exchanged a cautious look, observing the physical destruction in the entryway. "It gets worse," Connor whispered, leaning closer to the older officer and dropping his voice to a tragic, conspiratorial pitch. "She completely drained our joint life savings accounts tonight and locked me out of our home network. She even attacked my brother-in-law Jamal in a fit of absolute paranoid rage. He is hiding in the hallway right now because he is terrified of her. She is completely detached from reality, officers. I love her so much, but we need to get her to a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation before she does something irreversible." The officers stepped fully into the living room, their flashlights scanning the space before landing directly on me. They clearly expected to find a raving, hysterical woman tearing the house apart. Instead, they found me sitting gracefully on the velvet couch, my legs politely crossed. I was calmly sipping a cup of chamomile tea. I did not scream. I did not fight. I did not launch into a wild, convoluted story about cartels and offshore banking. "Ma'am," the older officer said, keeping a careful professional distance, We received a call stating you were acting erratically and presenting a danger to yourself and your family. I set my teacup down on the glass table with a soft, definitive click. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my trousers, and walked directly over to the officers. I reached into my pocket and casually handed the lead officer my sleek black federal business card. "I am perfectly fine, officers," I said, my voice projecting absolute calm and unwavering professional authority. "My husband is just stressed because of his upcoming firm gala tomorrow night. He is up for a massive promotion, and the immense pressure has caused a highly exaggerated family argument, resulting in some unfortunate property damage." The officer looked down at my high-level federal credentials and then looked back up at Connor. Connor's fake weeping suddenly looked incredibly foolish against my total composure. The officers realized immediately that they had walked into a wealthy suburban marital dispute, not a medical crisis. They handed my card back with a polite nod and informed Connor that unless an actual crime was being committed, they had no grounds to detain anyone. They turned around and walked out the front door, leaving the house in complete silence. The moment the police cruiser pulled out of the driveway, Connor let out a harsh, arrogant laugh. He turned to me, his chest puffed out with triumphant superiority. He genuinely believed my refusal to expose him to the local cops was a sign of weakness. "See that, Vanessa?" He gloated, a malicious, ugly smirk twisting his face. "No one believes you. Even with the cops standing right in your living room, you were too terrified to say a single word. You have absolutely nothing on me." I smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made the blood drain instantly from his face. "I didn't need them to arrest you today," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly, chilling whisper. "I need you to show up at your promotion gala tomorrow. If you don't, I send the real ledger to the syndicate." Jamal's grip on Connor's throat finally slipped as a violent coughing fit seized his battered chest. Connor shoved him backward with a heavy curse, and Jamal stumbled hard into the mahogany console table, sending a priceless crystal vase crashing to the floor. The sharp sound of shattering glass echoed through the grand foyer, but neither man seemed to care. Jamal collapsed onto his knees, crawling over the sharp shards of crystal directly toward the living room, where I stood watching the entire pathetic spectacle. The once smug, arrogant real estate broker was completely destroyed. Blood dripped from his split lip, staining his expensive tailored shirt and spilling onto my pristine Persian rug. He grabbed the hem of my silk trousers, his ruined face looking up at me with absolute sheer desperation. "Vanessa, please," he sobbed uncontrollably, his tears mixing with the blood on his chin. "You have to fix the digital transfer. You have to log back into your encrypted server and wire the real funds to the syndicate. They took Rachel. They dragged her right out of our bed while our children watched. I will sign over my entire real estate portfolio to you. I will give you every single asset I own if you just save my wife from the cartel." Connor stood in the hallway, rubbing his bruised neck and staring at me with a mixture of terror and dawning realization. The arrogant investment banker finally understood the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. My honeypot trap had completely sealed his fate. I had not just frozen his accounts. I had actively weaponized his own insatiable greed against him, making him look like a thief to one of the most ruthless criminal organizations in the world. He thought he was moving actual cash to save his skin, but he had merely transmitted a digital tracking beacon straight to the federal authorities and simultaneously triggered a cartel retaliation. I casually stepped back, pulling my trouser leg out of Jamal's bloody grasp. I walked over to the velvet living room couch and sat down gracefully, smoothing the fabric of my trousers. I picked up my porcelain cup of chamomile tea from the side table and took a slow, deliberate sip. The warm liquid felt incredibly soothing against the backdrop of their absolute panic. "You are begging the wrong person, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Why should I help the man who plotted to steal my house and helped fake my life insurance policy?" Jamal wiped his bloody nose with the back of his trembling hand, smearing the crimson stain across his cheek. He looked around the pristine living room, as if searching for some hidden escape hatch. "You do not understand, Vanessa," he pleaded, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. These men do not negotiate. They do not care about your federal investigation or Connor's bank accounts. They only care about their money. If you do not wire that cash right now, they are going to execute Rachel. You hold the keys to her life. You have the power to stop this nightmare. I took another sip of my tea, letting the silence stretch out agonizingly long. I watched the two men who had spent the last year meticulously planning my financial and physical demise, now utterly paralyzed by the consequences of their own actions. You forged my signature on a massive commercial property deed, Jamal. I reminded him coldly, the anger finally bleeding into my tone. You colluded with my husband to funnel my inheritance into a shell company. You deliberately set me up to take the fall for a massive money laundering operation. You hired a mechanic to tamper with my car brakes so you could collect the insurance money and pay off your cartel debt. You tried to put me in a morgue, and now you expect me to act as your personal savior. Because we are family! Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with hysterical panic. He slammed his bloody fists against the hardwood floor in a temper tantrum of pure desperation. You cannot just let them butcher Rachel. We are blood. I gave you away at your wedding. I stood by you when Dad passed away. You owe me this. I set my teacup down with a sharp, definitive clink against the glass table. I do not owe you a single breath, I shot back, leaning forward and locking my eyes onto his panicked face. You walked me down the aisle because you were hoping to secure a loan from Connor's bank. You needed his signature to save your failing strip mall project, and playing the loving, protective brother was just your sickeningly convenient bargaining chip. You have used me since day one. Connor suddenly snapped out of his stunned silence. The sheer panic of realizing the cartel would be hunting him next finally overrode his logical reasoning. He lunged toward his dropped leather briefcase in the foyer. His hands moved frantically, tearing through the side compartments until he pulled out a heavy black steel handgun. He racked the slide with a sharp metallic clack and marched directly into the living room. He leveled the barrel of the gun squarely at my chest. His hands were shaking so violently, I thought he might accidentally pull the trigger. "Unfreeze the real accounts right now!" Connor screamed, his handsome face completely contorted with desperate madness. He stepped closer, the gun trembling in his grip. "Log into the server and wire the cash, or I will make the life insurance payout happen tonight." I stared down the dark barrel of the gun, my pulse barely accelerating. I kept my expression entirely blank, calculating my exact next move. Just as his finger tightened against the trigger, a sudden intense burst of flashing red and blue lights swept violently across the living room windows. The bright strobing colors illuminated Connor's terrified face and cast long, frantic shadows across the walls. The heavy wail of police sirens pierced the night, cutting through the tension as multiple vehicles slammed into park on my front lawn. Connor stumbled backward, as if physically struck by my words. The absolute certainty in my voice finally shattered his delusions of control. He turned and fled out the front door without another syllable, his tailored suit hanging off his suddenly diminished frame. He was a cornered rat, and tomorrow night the trap would snap completely shut. The house fell entirely silent again. I spent the next hour methodically cleaning the blood off my Persian rug and sweeping up the shattered crystal from the foyer. I was just disposing of the glass when a timid, frantic knock echoed from the front door. I checked the security monitor, expecting Patricia or perhaps Jamal crawling back for mercy. Instead, the high-definition camera revealed a face I had only seen briefly wrapped in my bathrobe. It was Lexi. Lexi stood on my porch, trembling violently in the cool night air. Her perfect blonde hair was a tangled mess, and her designer makeup was heavily streaked with fresh tears. I unlocked the heavy oak door and swung it open, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. She flinched as if expecting me to strike her. "Please do not shut the door on me, Vanessa," she pleaded, her voice cracking with absolute sheer terror. "I know I am the last person you want to see, but I have absolutely nowhere else to go." Connor completely destroyed my life. I stepped aside, gesturing gracefully for her to enter. She practically collapsed into the foyer, wrapping her arms around herself. I led her into the living room, offering her the velvet armchair opposite my couch. She did not even notice the lingering damp spot where Jamal's blood had pooled just an hour earlier. He is a monster, Vanessa, Lexi sobbed, burying her face in her trembling hands. When we left here today, I told him I was packing my things. I told him I wanted nothing to do with him or his insane family drama. He just laughed at me. He told me I could not leave because I was entirely financially tied to him. She looked up, her eyes wide with panic. I checked my credit reports an hour ago. Connor opened 6 different platinum credit cards in my name. He used my social security number to secure a massive personal loan. He completely maxed out everything to cover his gambling debts and fund his fake offshore accounts. He drained my savings and ruined my credit score forever. If I leave him, I am entirely bankrupt and facing federal fraud charges. I sat back against the velvet cushions, resting my hands in my lap. Connor was even more of a parasite than my initial audits had revealed. He used everyone around him as a financial shield, insulating his own assets while burning through theirs. You thought you were stealing a wealthy, successful investment banker. I stated, my tone devoid of any sympathy. You thought you were getting a life of Caribbean islands and private yachts. Instead, you got a manipulative financial predator who used you as a convenient disposable credit line. Lexi nodded miserably, burying her face in her hands again. I was so incredibly stupid, she wept. He told me you were a cold, controlling nightmare. He told me you held all the purse strings and refused to let him invest in his brilliant ideas. I believed every single lie, and now the cartel is hunting him, and I am financially ruined. Please, Vanessa, you work in forensic auditing. You have to know a way to help me untangle my name from his accounts. I watched her completely break down, and a brilliant strategic pivot formed instantly in my mind. Connor still believed he had a slight upper hand. He believed he could use his upcoming promotion gala as a public shield, assuming I would never cause a massive scene in front of the city's financial elite. He needed his beautiful young mistress on his arm to sell the illusion of his perfect, successful life. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I can completely clear your name, Lexi, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, calculated pitch. I can wipe those fraudulent loans, erase the credit card debt, and grant you total immunity from the upcoming federal indictments. I can give you your entire life back by tomorrow night. Lexi gasped, her head snapping up. Her tear-stained face flushed with sudden, desperate hope. How she asked, her voice trembling, "What do I have to do?" I stood up and walked over to the mahogany console table. I opened a hidden drawer and retrieved a small, sleek black velvet box. I walked back and placed it directly into her shaking hands. Inside that box is a military-grade audio transmitter and an encrypted micro earpiece, I explained, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. Tomorrow night is Connor's massive promotion gala. He is going to force you to attend to maintain his pathetic facade. You are going to put that earpiece in and wear the microphone hidden on your dress. You are going to follow my exact instructions through the earpiece. Lexi stared at the velvet box as if it were a live grenade. What exactly are you going to make me do? She whispered. You are going to stand right next to him near the main podium, I commanded coldly. You are going to ask him specific directed questions about the stolen funds, the fake life insurance policy, and his fraudulent use of your identity. You are going to bait him into a full, unedited confession, right as the microphone feeds directly into the gala's main audiovisual system. I want every single investment banker, board member, and wealthy client in that ballroom to hear exactly who Connor Thorne truly is. Lexi swallowed hard, clutching the velvet box tightly against her chest. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of profound awe and deep primal fear. She looked around the immaculate living room, taking in the sheer calculated precision of my entire trap. How are you so calm, Vanessa? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your husband cheated on you, stole your money, and tried to have you killed for a payout. His family tormented you. Yet you are sitting here, sipping tea and orchestrating a flawless takedown. How did you plan all this without them ever noticing? I smiled, a slow, chilling expression that finally matched the cold ice running through my veins. When you spend your whole life being told you are the boring, ugly duckling, you learn how to observe, I replied, my tone sharp and absolute. They thought my job was nothing but tedious spreadsheets and dull numbers. They thought I was a quiet, compliant machine. They spent years talking over me, ignoring me, and treating me like a convenient piece of furniture. They never see the quiet ones coming. Lexi nodded slowly, standing up from the velvet chair. She wiped her eyes, her posture suddenly shifting from terrified victim to determined survivor. "I will do exactly what you say," she promised, her voice firming with newfound resolve. "I will destroy him tomorrow night." She turned and walked out the front door, disappearing into the dark suburban streets. I locked the heavy oak door and walked back toward the kitchen. The board was perfectly set. The pieces were all moving exactly as I commanded. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently against the granite kitchen counter. I picked it up, swiping the screen to read the incoming text message. It was from Rachel, Jamal's wife. The message was frantic, filled with typos and sheer desperate panic. "The syndicate let me go, but they took Jamal. Connor says if you do not bring the money to the gala, Jamal is dead. Please, Vanessa, save him." I read the words twice, letting the reality of the situation settle into my mind. Connor was truly a cornered, desperate animal. He had successfully traded Jamal's life for Rachel's, using his own brother-in-law as a human bargaining chip to force my hand at the gala. He believed threatening Jamal's execution would break my resolve and force me to wire the $5 million. He thought he had finally found my ultimate weakness. He was spectacularly wrong. I tapped the screen, bringing up the digital keyboard. I did not offer comfort. I did not offer reassurance. I simply typed out a 4-word response and hit send. "See you at the party." Connor instantly dropped the weapon, as if the dark steel had caught fire. He kicked it violently under the heavy mahogany credenza, just as a sharp, authoritative pounding echoed against the front door. The police had responded to a noise complaint from my cautious neighbors. Connor stood completely paralyzed, his face drained of all color, his chest heaving with sheer panic. I walked past him and calmly opened the door, assuring the uniformed officers that a dropped piece of heavy furniture had caused the loud crash. I played the part of the serene, unbothered homeowner, perfectly sending them away with a polite, reassuring smile. I locked the door and turned back to my terrified husband. "I did not save you," I whispered coldly, watching him tremble. "I just need you alive for your promotion tomorrow night." The morning of the gala broke with crisp, clear skies and an electric tension in the air. I stood in the center of my master bedroom and stared at the drab gray suits and sensible beige blouses lining my expansive closet. For years, I had deliberately dressed like a background character. I had actively cultivated the image of the boring, invisible auditor so Connor and his family would constantly underestimate me. Today, that disguise died. I pulled every dull piece of fabric from the hangers and threw them into a massive discarded pile on the hardwood floor. I drove straight to the most exclusive high-end boutique in the city center. I ignored the practical evening wear and walked directly toward a stunning blood-red designer gown. The heavy silk plunged daringly at the neckline and hugged every single curve before flowing into a sharp, elegant train. It was not the dress of a supportive corporate wife. It was the armor of an executioner. I paired it with sleek black stiletto heels, a dramatic sweep of dark lipstick, and a diamond choker that commanded absolute attention. Returning home, I moved on to my digital arsenal. I sat at my home office desk and booted up a specialized encrypted tablet. Lexi had done her job flawlessly earlier that morning. Using the micro earpiece and transmitter I provided, she had successfully bypassed the venue's security protocols, posing as event staff. She had hardwired my receiver directly into the gala's main audiovisual network during the catering setup. I ran a quick diagnostic check on my screen, confirming a perfect connection. I now had total remote access to the massive projection system that would serve as the backdrop for Connor's big moment. I uploaded the forged quitclaim deed, the fraudulent life insurance policy featuring Rachel's face, and the complete ledger of his offshore cartel accounts. I secured everything behind a single timed execution command on my tablet. The annual Thorn Financial Gala was the absolute crown jewel of the city's corporate calendar. It was a massive, opulent event designed to showcase wealth power and absolute prestige. Tonight was supposed to be Connor's ultimate victory lap. The board of directors was officially naming him senior partner in front of the most elite financial players in the state. He genuinely believed that his ruthless threat against Jamal's life had finally broken my spirit. He was convinced I was coming tonight completely defeated to quietly hand over the decryption keys, wire the funds to the syndicate, and save his miserable skin. He thought his impending promotion would serve as an impenetrable shield against any accusations. He completely underestimated the fact that I was not bringing a rescue package. I was bringing a digital guillotine, and I intended to drop the blade in front of everyone he respected. I arrived at the grand ballroom just as the opening cocktail hour reached its loud, vibrant peak. The massive crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over hundreds of guests in tailored tuxedos and shimmering designer dresses. The heavy oak doors swung open, and I stepped over the threshold. I did not shrink into the shadows or look for a quiet corner. I walked with my head held high, the blood-red silk of my gown catching the light and demanding absolute attention. The transformation was so jarring, so completely dominant, that the conversations nearest the door instantly died. Waiters stopped with their silver trays hovering in midair. Wealthy board members lowered their champagne flutes. The silence rippled outward like a wave until the entire opulent ballroom fell completely quiet. The city's financial elite stared in absolute shock. The boring, plain wife they had whispered about for years had vanished completely. I walked through the parted crowd looking like an absolute queen ready to claim her kingdom. Before I could reach the center of the room, Connor materialized from the crowd like a desperate predator. His handsome face was a tight mask of furious panic. He intercepted me smoothly, masking his aggression from the watching guests by gripping my waist with punishing force. His fingers dug painfully into my side as he pulled me flush against his chest, leaning his mouth right against my ear. "Where's the drive?" he whispered menacingly, his breath hot and frantic against my skin. I did not flinch. I smiled, a cold, radiant expression perfectly tailored for the audience watching us. I reached into my sleek black clutch and handed him a small velvet box. "Right here," I whispered back, my voice smooth as glass. "But you have to wait for your speech to open it." Connor stared down at the small velvet box resting in his palm as if it contained a live explosive. His jaw tightened, and he opened his mouth to demand answers, but the heavy, booming voice of Arthur Sterling, the firm's imposing CEO, suddenly echoed through the grand ballroom. Sterling was standing at the main podium, officially calling Connor to the stage to accept his senior partnership. Caught entirely off guard, Connor hastily shoved the velvet box deep into the inner breast pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket. He shot me one final venomous glare before pasting on his signature winning smile and jogging up the carpeted steps to the brightly lit stage. Connor gripped the edges of the mahogany podium, looking out over the sea of wealthy investors, elite power brokers, and corporate sharks. "I stand before you tonight, humbled and incredibly grateful." Connor began, his voice dripping with practiced artificial sincerity. "Success in this industry requires absolute unwavering integrity, deep family values, and relentless hard work. I could never have reached this incredible milestone tonight without the constant, unwavering support of my beautiful wife, Vanessa." I picked up a crystal champagne flute from a passing waiter's silver tray and tapped the rim sharply with a cocktail spoon. The sharp, ringing sound cut directly through the polite applause. I walked gracefully up the steps, my blood-red designer gown trailing behind me like liquid fire. I stepped right up to the podium and gently but firmly pulled the microphone away from my stunned husband. "My husband is entirely too modest," I announced, my voice projecting with crystal clarity across the massive, silent room. "I think we need to show everyone exactly how hard he works behind the scenes." I gave a subtle nod toward the back of the room where Lexi stood hidden in the dark shadows of the AV control booth. She tapped the master console, and the massive cinematic projector screen directly behind Connor instantly flashed to life. It did not display the standard corporate congratulatory video. "Here we see Connor's brilliant investment strategy. I narrated, pacing the stage like a seasoned executive running a hostile board meeting. A high-definition scan of a legal document filled the 50-foot screen behind us. This is a forged quitclaim deed transferring my family home into a hidden shell company. Notice the incredibly crude attempt at forging my signature, which my husband used to take out an illegal $800,000 mortgage. Those stolen funds were immediately laundered through his brother-in-law Jamal's fake LLC. The collective gasp from the audience sucked the oxygen right out of the room. I tapped my synchronized tablet, bringing up the next slide. The screen shifted to display bank routing numbers, offshore account details, and the exact timestamps of the fraudulent wire transfers. Connor's charming facade completely shattered into a million pieces. Raw animal panic seized his features. He lunged wildly toward the podium, desperately trying to snatch the tablet from my hands to cut the digital feed. He never even made it close. Two massive firm security guards materialized from the edge of the stage and slammed him backward. They knew me perfectly from my years of conducting meticulous forensic audits for their external security reviews. They planted their heavy hands on Connor's chest, shoving him hard against the projector screen and pinning him in place. Down in the crowd, Jamal was sweating profusely right through his cheap, rented tuxedo. The cartel had released him solely on the condition that Connor paid his massive syndicate debts tonight. Realizing the money was completely gone, and the federal authorities would soon be involved, Jamal bolted toward the heavy oak double doors at the back of the ballroom. He grabbed the brass handles and yanked violently, but the doors refused to budge. Lexi had engaged the magnetic security locks directly from the control booth, trapping every single person inside the room. The sheer panic in the ballroom reached a boiling point when Rachel suddenly shoved her way to the front of the crowd. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, her face twisted with absolute fury. "Make her stop!" Rachel screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Do not listen to a single word she says. She has always been a jealous psycho making up lies because we are successful and she is nothing." I did not even blink at her pathetic outburst. I simply smiled and tapped the screen of my tablet one more time. "A psycho," I repeated softly into the microphone. "Let us consult the audio records." A crisp digital audio file loaded onto the screen, and a voice echoed through the ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system. It was undeniably Rachel's voice, ringing out with terrifying crystal clarity. "I took the medical exam for you, Connor. The life insurance policy is completely locked in. When do I get my 20% of the death payout?" Rachel clamped both hands over her mouth, stumbling backward as the crowd physically recoiled away from her in absolute unadulterated horror. She had just publicly confessed to conspiracy to commit murder on tape in front of the entire financial elite of the city. Arthur Sterling marched furiously onto the stage, completely ignoring the stunned, panicked whispers rippling through the ballroom. His face was a dark mottled purple, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "Thorne, what the absolute hell is this?" The CEO demanded, his voice carrying a lethal, authoritative weight even without a microphone. Connor stammered wildly, holding his hands up in a pathetic, placating gesture while the security guards held him tight. "Arthur, I swear it is a setup. She hacked my personal accounts. It is a deep fake." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that silenced his pathetic groveling immediately. I turned slowly toward the furious CEO, squaring my shoulders in my crimson gown. "Oh, Arthur, it gets so much better," I promised, my voice ringing with absolute predatory dominance. "Connor has not just been stealing from his family to fund his offshore syndicates." Slide 4, please, Lexi. The massive projector screen flickered once more, replacing the forged life insurance policy with highly classified internal documents. The screen illuminated the firm's own confidential corporate spreadsheets, exposing the internal client ledgers and revealing every single elite account Connor had systematically drained. The massive, high-definition numbers scrolled continuously upward, painting the faces of the stunned audience in a harsh, unforgiving white light. These were not anonymous corporate accounts or distant hedge funds. These were the personal, private portfolios of the exact people standing in this room. The screen displayed the meticulously tracked routing numbers, showing exactly how Connor had systematically siphoned millions of dollars from their trust funds, their offshore holdings, and their generational wealth directly into the cartel's complex money laundering network. For years, Connor had laughed at my career, calling me a glorified bean counter who lacked the killer instinct required for real high-stakes finance. He used to roll his eyes when I balanced our household budget to the exact penny, telling his friends I was obsessed with meaningless details. He never once realized that my boring, tedious auditing skills gave me the exact tools necessary to track every single stolen cent he funneled out of his wealthy clients' pockets. I had spent the last 3 weeks silently tracing his digital footprints, cracking his pathetic encryption, and building an airtight federal case against him from the comfort of our living room couch. A sudden violent wave of realization crashed through the opulent ballroom. The wealthy attendees, previously frozen in total shock, suddenly erupted into absolute deafening chaos. Men in custom-tailored tuxedos began shouting frantically, pulling out their phones and dialing their personal brokers in a desperate panic. Women in shimmering designer gowns screamed in outrage, realizing their family fortunes and children's trust funds were completely gone. Arthur Sterling stood paralyzed on the stage, his face completely drained of blood. The heavy crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering into 100 pieces on the hardwood stage as he watched his prestigious firm's immaculate reputation disintegrate in real time. Connor was completely broken. The arrogant, untouchable senior partner dissolved into a pathetic, cornered coward right before my eyes. He looked out at the furious mob of his former mentors and clients, and his survival instinct desperately searched for a scapegoat. He pointed a shaking, sweating finger directly into the chaotic crowd, singling out the terrified figure of my brother-in-law. "It was him!" Connor shrieked, his voice cracking loudly over the microphone system. "Jamal made me do it. He owed massive debts to the cartel from his failed commercial real estate ventures. He threatened to kill my wife if I did not help him cover his losses. He is the one who brought the syndicate into my firm. I had to pay them to protect Vanessa." Jamal let out a roar of absolute pure, unadulterated fury. The cartel had taken his wife Rachel just hours ago. He was facing imminent federal prison time, and now the man who had orchestrated the entire money laundering operation was throwing him directly under the bus. Jamal had spent his entire life playing the loyal, supportive family man, constantly covering for Connor's arrogant mistakes. The betrayal shattered his final shred of restraint. Jamal scrambled up the stage stairs with an animalistic snarl, completely bypassing the stunned security guards. He tackled Connor to the hardwood floor, driving a heavy fist straight into Connor's perfectly sculpted jaw. The sickening crack echoed loudly through the ballroom. The two men who had spent their entire lives pretending to be the perfect, wealthy pillars of our family immediately devolved into a bloody, vicious street brawl right on the presentation stage. They tore at each other's expensive suits, throwing desperate punches and screaming wild accusations, while the city's financial elite watched in absolute, utter disgust. One of the massive security guards finally managed to pry Jamal off, dragging him backward across the stage as he spat blood and furious curses. Connor crawled backward, his lips split open and his pristine tuxedo shirt torn to shreds. His chest heaved as he frantically searched the room for an exit. His panicked eyes darted toward me, and a sudden flash of desperate, delusional hope illuminated his ruined face. He reached frantically into the inner breast pocket of his ruined jacket, pulling out the small black velvet box I had handed him just moments before. In his terrified mind, he genuinely believed I had brought him a lifeline. He thought he could still control me. He believed the box contained a digital flash drive with the decryption keys or the override codes needed to freeze the cartel transfers and save the remaining funds. He thought his plain, boring wife had come to rescue him one last time. His bloody, shaking fingers fumbled with the tiny brass latch and he popped the velvet lid open. He stared down at the contents, and all the remaining hope instantly drained from his soul. There was no flash drive. There were no override codes. Resting on the pristine white silk was a single severed piece of heavy black rubber tubing. It was the cut brake line from my car, the exact piece of physical evidence linking him directly to my attempted murder. Connor slowly raised his head, looking at me with total paralyzing terror. He finally understood that I had orchestrated every single detail of his absolute destruction. I offered him one final victorious smile, just as the heavy magnetic locks on the ballroom doors disengaged with a loud electronic chirp. The heavy oak doors burst violently open, and dozens of armed FBI and IRS agents swarmed into the opulent room, screaming for everyone to get down. Agents in tactical gear flooded the aisles, their flashlights cutting through the dim romantic lighting of the gala, as the booming voice of the lead agent ordered Connor Thorne to put his hands on his head. Two agents instantly descended on the stage, tackling Connor to the polished hardwood floor before he could even process the command. He hit the ground with a sickening thud, his expensive tuxedo jacket tearing at the seams. Beside him, Jamal tried to scramble backward, but a tactical officer slammed him down, driving a heavy knee into his spine. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed over the frantic screams of the ballroom. The wealthy attendees scattered like cockroaches, scrambling over overturned chairs and shattered crystal in a desperate bid to escape the federal raid. The room was in utter, absolute chaos. Men who had just been congratulating Connor were now shouting for their personal attorneys, while women clutched their diamond necklaces in sheer panic. Lexi stood safely near the exit, watching the destruction of the man who had ruined her credit and her life. I gave her a subtle nod of approval, and she slipped quietly out the side door, her immunity fully secured and her future finally her own. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark windbreaker pushed his way through the frantic crowd and stepped onto the stage. He bypassed Connor completely and walked directly toward me. It was Special Agent Harrison, the lead investigator for the Financial Crimes Division. We had spent the last 72 hours communicating exclusively through encrypted channels, meticulously orchestrating this exact moment. He stopped right in front of me and extended his hand with a look of profound professional respect. "We got everything, Vanessa," he stated, his voice cutting cleanly through the surrounding noise. "The honeypot data you routed through the audio-visual feed gave us direct access to his entire offshore network. The cartel's holding accounts are completely frozen. You handed us the biggest corporate money laundering bust of the decade on a silver platter." I shook his hand firmly, my posture perfectly straight. "I promised you an airtight case." "Agent Harrison," I replied smoothly, maintaining total composure amidst the swirling chaos. I always balance my ledgers. Before Harrison could say another word, a shrill, desperate shriek pierced the air. Patricia shoved her way violently past two uniformed officers, her perfectly styled hair flying in wild, messy strands around her pale face. My mother had attended this gala solely to bask in the reflected glory of her golden son-in-law and her favorite daughter. She had spent the entire evening bragging to the other socialites about Connor's incredible promotion and Rachel's flawless life. Now she was watching her entire carefully curated reality burn to ash right before her eyes. She threw herself forward, practically falling to her knees at the edge of the stage. Her designer gown pooled in the spilled champagne on the floor. She reached out, grabbing the hem of my red dress with trembling, frantic hands. "Vanessa, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with sheer unadulterated terror. "You have to tell them I did not know anything about this. You have to tell them I am completely innocent. I am your mother, Vanessa. You cannot let them take everything from me. They are talking about seizing the house. They are talking about freezing my personal accounts. Please save me." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. The woman who had actively cheered when my husband tore me down and who had prioritized social status over her own daughter's safety. I did not pull my dress away. I simply stared at her with eyes like Arctic ice. "You told me I was a miserable failure." I stated, my voice deathly quiet, but projecting perfectly over the chaotic din of the room. "You told me I was a disappointment because I did not have a perfect wealthy marriage like my sister Rachel. You spent 30 years telling me I was absolutely nothing." I slowly raised my hand and pointed a single manicured finger toward the far side of the ballroom. Jamal was currently being dragged toward the heavy oak doors, tears of absolute panic streaming down his bruised and bloody face. Nearby, Rachel was screaming hysterically, fighting against a female IRS agent, reading her the Miranda rights regarding the fraudulent life insurance policy. "Well, take a good long look at Rachel's perfect marriage now," I commanded, my tone absolutely devoid of any mercy. "Take a look at the glorious, successful family you cherished so much. You built your entire life on shallow lies, Patricia. You chose the predators and the parasites because they looked good in a tailored suit and threw expensive parties. You made your choices, and now you get to enjoy the harvest." Patricia slumped forward, burying her face in her hands and wailing loudly as two agents stepped in and pulled her away for questioning. The grand ballroom was rapidly emptying, leaving behind only scattered debris, overturned tables, and the shattered remnants of the Thorne legacy. Two federal agents hauled Connor roughly to his feet. His face was a bloody, bruised mess from Jamal's violent assault, and his hands were secured tightly behind his back. As they dragged him past the center of the stage, he stopped fighting them. He dug his heels into the hardwood floor and wrenched his head around to glare at me. Pure venomous hatred burned in his eyes. He spat a mouthful of dark blood onto the polished stage right at my feet. "You think you won," he sneered, letting out a wet, ragged laugh that sounded like tearing metal. "You might have taken my money. You might have sent me to federal prison. But you are still just a lonely, pathetic, bitter woman, Vanessa. Look at you standing there all by yourself. No one will ever truly love you." I stood tall in my blood-red gown, bathed in the harsh white light of the projector screen displaying his ruined empire. I looked at the broken, pathetic man who had tried to murder me for a payout. I reached over to the mahogany podium and picked up an untouched crystal glass of champagne left behind by the fleeing CEO. I held it up, letting the light catch the sparkling golden liquid. I smiled a slow, brilliant, genuine smile. "I love me," I whispered, holding his furious gaze until the agents finally shoved him forward and out the heavy oak doors. And that is exactly enough. The morning sun broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my immaculate Beacon Hill home, casting long, peaceful shadows across the Persian rug. I sat at my granite kitchen island, sipping a hot cup of black coffee and watching the wall-mounted television. The news networks were having an absolute field day. The Thorne Financial Gala bust was the lead story on every single local and national broadcast, dominating the morning news cycle. High-definition footage from outside the grand ballroom showed Connor and Jamal being shoved aggressively into the back of armored federal transport vehicles. Their bruised, battered faces were plastered across the screen alongside glaring red graphics spelling out the words, "Massive Ponzi Scheme." Financial anchors excitedly dissected how the prestigious senior partner had spent years systematically defrauding his most elite clients to fund his offshore gambling habits and severe cartel debts. The media circus was relentless and glorious. Pundits debated the sheer audacity of the crime, while former friends and wealthy investors scrambled over each other to give exclusive interviews denouncing the Thorne family. The entire carefully curated dynasty had burned to the ground overnight, and I had happily supplied the matches. Later that afternoon, I sat in a pristine glass-walled conference room at the local FBI field office. Special Agent Harrison slid a thick stack of finalized clearance documents across the mahogany table. He formally shook my hand, thanking me for the absolute precision of the operation. Because I had actively served as the central honeypot, providing the federal authorities with unencrypted access to the offshore ledgers and the syndicate routing numbers, my hands were completely clean. I had legally insulated every single one of my personal assets before dropping the hammer. My house, my private accounts, and my legitimate business holdings were fully protected and entirely untouched by the sprawling federal seizure warrants. I walked out of the federal building as a completely free and incredibly wealthy woman. The true beauty of the situation, however, lay far beyond the reach of the federal government. The syndicate leaders were not forgiving men. by exposing the offshore ledgers, I had inadvertently revealed to the cartel exactly how much money Connor and Jamal had been secretly skimming off the top of their own laundering operation. The two men had arrogantly tried to play both sides, stealing from a ruthless, heavily armed cartel, while simultaneously defrauding their wealthy investors. Now Connor and Jamal were sitting in federal holding cells, completely stripped of their wealth, their power, and their expensive corporate shields. They were highly visible targets, locked in a concrete cage, knowing with absolute terrifying certainty that the syndicate's violent reach extended deep into the federal prison system. They were not just facing decades behind bars. They were waiting in constant agonizing fear for the cartel's brutal, inevitable justice. Every shadow in the cell block, every footstep in the corridor would serve as a constant reminder that their ultimate debt was finally coming due. While the two men awaited their fate behind concrete walls, Rachel was facing her own personal apocalypse. The federal forfeiture warrants hit Jamal's estate with the force of a Category 5 hurricane. IRS agents descended on her sprawling suburban mansion, slapping neon eviction notices on the massive oak doors and seizing absolutely everything of value to pay off the monumental debts and victim restitution. News helicopters captured the pathetic scene of Rachel standing on her manicured curb, sobbing hysterically as government agents carried out her prized collection of designer handbags, her luxury watches, and her custom diamond jewelry. Her perfect marriage was a certified federal crime scene, and her boundless wealth had evaporated into thin air. The neighbors she had spent years trying to impress stood on their lawns, watching her complete downfall in fascinated silence. She had nothing left to her name but the clothes on her back. 2 days later, the security monitor in my kitchen chimed softly. I glanced at the high-resolution screen and saw a thoroughly ruined woman standing on my front porch. I smoothed the fabric of my tailored silk trousers and walked to the front entrance, swinging the heavy oak door open. Rachel looked absolutely wretched. Her expensive blonde highlights were greasy and flat, and she wore a stained, oversized sweater that clearly belonged to a discount rack. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, her face puffy from days of relentless crying. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently in the crisp morning air. She looked nothing like the arrogant woman who had openly mocked me at family dinners. "Vanessa, please!" she begged, her voice trembling with pathetic desperation. "They took everything. The bank completely froze my accounts and the feds seized all the cars. I have literally nowhere to go. My friends will not even answer my phone calls. Please just let me stay in your basement. I will clean the house. I will cook the meals. I will do whatever you want. Just give me a safe place to sleep tonight." I leaned against the heavy doorframe, looking out over my pristine manicured lawn and the beautiful quiet street. I felt no pity. I felt no lingering anger. I felt nothing but pure, unadulterated freedom. I looked back down at the pathetic woman who had spent years mocking my life and plotting to profit from my murder. "Remember when you told me a barren woman did not need a 5-bedroom house?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and smooth. Rachel flinched violently as if I had struck her across the face. She opened her mouth to stammer a desperate apology, but I held up a single manicured finger to silence her instantly. "You were absolutely right," I stated, offering her a bright, brilliant smile. "That is exactly why I am selling it. The paperwork cleared this morning. I am taking my fully protected assets and traveling the world." I stepped back into the warm, inviting foyer, looking at her one final time. "You can find a shelter downtown." I shut the heavy oak door right in her face, engaging the deadbolt with a sharp, satisfying click. Fast forward 6 months. The grueling, relentless whirlwind of high-profile federal hearings, aggressive asset liquidations, and media frenzy had finally reached its ultimate conclusion. The massive financial scandal had consumed the city, tearing through the elite social circles and leaving a trail of absolute devastation in its wake. I sat quietly in the back row of the polished mahogany gallery inside the federal courthouse in downtown Boston. The air conditioning hummed softly, creating a sterile, freezing atmosphere that perfectly matched the severity of the proceedings taking place. The massive courtroom was packed wall to wall with ruthless reporters, furious former investors, and stern federal agents who had spent half a year untangling the massive Ponzi scheme. I smoothed the skirt of my navy blue designer dress and focused my complete attention on the front of the room. The federal judge, a formidable woman with absolute zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, slammed her heavy wooden gavel down on the sounding block. Her voice boomed across the silent room, delivering the final, unalterable verdicts. Connor Thorne, the once untouchable titan of the financial world, was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the slightest possibility of early parole. Beside him, Jamal slumped heavily forward in his seat, burying his face in his trembling hands as the judge handed him a strict 15-year sentence for his active role in facilitating the cartel money laundering operation. And then came Patricia. My mother stood trembling violently before the towering bench, clutching a crumpled tissue. Her elite socialite friends had entirely abandoned her, leaving her completely isolated. The judge looked down at her with absolute unwavering disgust before sentencing her to 5 years in a minimum security facility for willful tax evasion and active complicity in concealing the fraudulent offshore accounts. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic wail, begging for mercy, but the bailiffs immediately silenced her. The heavy wooden doors at the side of the courtroom swung open, and the armed federal marshals stepped forward to collect their high-profile prisoners. Connor slowly rose to his feet. He was completely stripped of his custom-tailored Italian suits, his expensive imported silk ties, and his flashy platinum cufflinks. Instead, he wore a bright neon orange prison jumpsuit that hung loosely off his dramatically thinned frame. The immense weight of his crimes and the terrifying knowledge that the syndicate was waiting for him inside those prison walls had visibly aged him a full decade. His perfectly styled dark hair was rapidly thinning and graying at the temples, and his posture was hunched and utterly defeated. He looked absolutely pathetic, a crumbling hollow shell of the arrogant predator I had married. As the marshals clamped the heavy iron shackles around his wrists and ankles, the loud metallic clanking echoed loudly through the silent packed gallery. He began the slow, shuffling, humiliating walk toward the side exit. But right before he reached the heavy doors, he stopped. He dug his prison-issued boots into the floor, turning his head. His hollow, defeated eyes desperately searched the crowded gallery until they finally landed directly on me. He stared at me, his face completely drained of color as the absolute finality of his ruined life washed over him. I did not glare at him. I did not shout or smile triumphantly. I simply raised my right hand and offered him a small, perfectly polite wave. It was the exact same condescending, casual wave he had given me months ago, when he confidently handed me those fabricated tax documents, thinking I was nothing but a gullible, naive fool. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His jaw clenched tight, and he looked away, staring blankly at the floor, as the armed guards shoved him roughly through the doorway, disappearing into the dark holding corridor forever. I stood up from the hard wooden bench, gathered my designer purse, and walked quietly out of the courtroom. Pushing through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse, I stepped out into the brilliant, warm afternoon sunshine. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the crisp, fresh air, letting it completely fill my lungs. I searched myself for any lingering traces of bitterness or deep-seated anger, but found absolutely nothing. I was not angry. I was not bitter. I was completely and utterly free. A sleek black town car was waiting for me at the curb. I climbed into the plush leather back seat and instructed the driver to take me directly to the international airport. I had a first-class ticket to Paris, waiting for me purchased entirely with the millions of corporate air miles I had legally extracted from Connor's business accounts just hours before the federal freeze took effect. As the car glided smoothly through the city streets, I watched the towering skyscrapers of the financial district fade into the distance. The life I had known was over, but the life I had earned was just beginning. When I boarded the massive aircraft, I settled into my luxurious private suite and watched the city skyline shrink away through the small oval window. A flight attendant silently approached and offered me a crystal flute filled with vintage champagne. I took it gratefully, leaning back against the plush leather seat. She sips her champagne as the plane takes off. The girl they called a boring, ugly duckling had burned their empire to the ground without breaking a sweat, Revenge isn't just sweet, it's perfectly balanced on the ledger. The most powerful lesson from this story is that true worth is never defined by the opinions of those who refuse to see our value. For too long, the protagonist sought validation from a family that prioritized status and superficial perfection over her well-being. She learned that setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary step toward reclaiming her own life and dignity. By finally choosing herself, she transformed her pain into a foundation for a successful, authentic future, proving that resilience is the ultimate form of triumph. Have you ever had to draw a hard boundary to protect your own worth? Share your experience in the comments below.